Brexiteers will be joining her too. But what do you want to hear from Mrs May? If it's, here's my clear Brexit plan, call 0345 6060 973. Maybe it's walk away, Mrs May, in which case text to 84850. Or do you think she perhaps needs to give in to Michel Barnier's demands, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch me on Facebook. I'm live from London next. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Hope you're having a good Sunday morning. Are you confused by what's going on with Brexit? Do you know what the Prime Minister really stands for? And I ask that because a really fascinating poll out today. It's in The Independent on Sunday. It's carried out by a reputable polling group, BMG Research, and they interviewed 1,500 people. And when asked the question, do you know what Mrs May's Brexit plan is? Guess how many very strongly know and understand what her plan is? Well, it's 3%. And I'm wondering where they found them from. Because 75% of you in this poll say they don't really know what her strategy is and what the end goal is. And I have to say, I think that reflects the position pretty clearly. You see, on the one hand, we get the Lancaster House speech, which we had in January of last year, where she set out very clearly, we're leaving the single market, we're leaving the customs union, we're getting on with it, we've got this vision of a global Britain, and that was all very clear. And then we get the Florence speech, where she basically says the European Union's absolutely wonderful. Everything it does is terrific. And even though we're leaving it, we're going to rejoin various different parts of it. And we've had this ongoing series of negotiations that I think it's fair to say took a considerable turn for the worse during the course of last week. Firstly, we had the story about the punishment plan. Monsieur Barnier's plan that during the transition period, that's the period at the end of Article 50 that goes on for about 2 years, the Prime Minister wants, although I suspect it'll be, if we get it, until the next general election, that during that period of time, without recourse even to their own court in Luxembourg, that the European Union would be able, if they thought we breached the rules, to do all sorts of things to us, like stop planes flying and stop trade. And, I mean, frankly, it was something that really did very much back up the Jacob Rees-Mogg comment about us being a vassal state, a state that could be punished, a state that would have no say over laws and judgments that were being made over it. Frankly, to me, any British government that was prepared to accept that would have done a sort of Vichyite type deal. It would be completely and wholly unacceptable in every way. And yet, far from backing away, Mr Barnier decided on Friday that he frankly would simply double down. And he said, the time has come to tell the truth, he said. The only thing I can say, without the customs union and outside the single market, barriers to trade and goods and services are unavoidable. Which made me begin to think, perhaps we're simply wasting our time. Perhaps there isn't any point in going on with these conversations if he said already none of this is going to happen. If you remember, I went on the 8th of January to see Michel Barnier, and I left that meeting with a distinct impression that he was not going to give anything, frankly, on financial services and perhaps other services as well. So in the light of all of this, and stories and rumours about the number of letters that have gone into the chairman of the 1922 committee, and apparently we're quite close to a leadership bid being challenged, and given that only 3% of the nation understand what Mrs May's Brexit plan is, I want to know this morning, what do you want to hear next from Mrs May? Now, one man who has not been too shy over the course of the last few days in saying what he thinks is Lord Digby Jones of Birmingham, who tweeted yesterday, the EU want to punish us with no need for an ECJ ruling. If we break the rules of transition, can we have the same rights, please, for the years of cheating, re the rules, by France, Italy and Greece? He said earlier on in the week, They want to have a unilateral sanction over us if we misbehave. The sheer bullying and hypocrisy of it. And he even went further than that and said, we need to be shot of the lot as quickly as possible. Our country has previous on dealing with bullies. Well, joining me this morning, international businessman, crossbench peer in the House of Lords, former CBI Director General and Trade Minister under Gordon Brown, so a man that spent a bit of time in those smoke-filled rooms in Brussels. Lord Digby Jones, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Good morning, everybody.
Great to have you on the show, Digby, and great to have somebody on who has actually sat in those meeting rooms with European commissioners. And you, of course, visited Michel Barnier a couple of days after me, didn't you, in January?
Yep, absolutely. And I left quite depressed, actually, because I'm an optimistic bloke. And secondly, having worked on the inside of all of this, my expectations were never high, you know. And
Yes.
when I hear that what they're basically saying is, it's perfectly all right, we'll let the Remain camp and the media do the job for us, we don't need to do anything, your country's at civil war, and all you need to do is just sit here and wait and you'll give in. Then when you get them saying words like, we'll punish you if you transgress. And I have sat in these meetings, Nigel, over 20 years and watched the French cheat. I've watched the Spanish and the Greeks and the Italians cheat. And the nerve of it to say, well, if you break a rule, we'll punish you. And I was left with this impression that they will never allow any sort of deal on financial services.
So was I. Yep, so was I.
And that is 8% of the GDP of the country, if you like, the sales revenue of the country, it's 8%, but it's 12% of our tax take. So this is your genuine value added. And at the end of the day, if you think about it, they're really saying, we're not going to do that because at the end of the day, we've got one chance to help Paris and Berlin and Frankfurt. It's now. So we're going to punish you now. So we set it up for 30 years, knowing that you at the end of the day will give in. Because as I was left with this impression, Nigel.
Yep.
You joined 43 years ago for trade, Britain. You've lived 43 years in the EU wanting trade. And you're leaving talking about trade. We are trying to build the United States of Europe. We want one army, one flag, one currency, one president. And we do not see this as trade. And if there's less trade and more unemployment, it's a price worth paying to build one country. I don't want to belong to Greater Germany. I don't want, actually, to belong to one country. What I want is some dear friends in Europe, some good companies in Europe, creating work for an unemployed kid in Athens and a single mum in Madrid. And I want people listening to this all over the country, because you're a national radio station. I want you actually thinking in terms of, we ought to get on with people in Europe. But you're not going to pull it off when what they want to do is punish us and bully us. And therefore, frankly, if business needs to know where it stands, I'll tell you where you stand. Behave like America, behave like Brazil, like China, like India. Let's do a deal from outside. And then they don't get the 39 billion either, Nigel.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, we have agreed in so-called phase one, we've agreed to a whole series of concessions. But I'm just wondering, I've been making an argument now for a year that what we perhaps ought to try to do, and maybe it is too late, I don't know, but what we should try to do, and certainly should have tried to do, is to go round the back of the European Commission, to get away from those glass and steel structures with tens of thousands of bureaucrats, all with their salaries and pensions and good lunches and all the rest of it. Because I'm very struck, that the French wine producers, the German car makers, the Belgian chocolate manufacturers, they don't want their relationship with their best export market in the world messed up. Is it too late, Digby Jones, for us to go directly to try to get some of those, to try and get the French farmers, for example, to say to Macron, if you go along with Barnier, you're damaging us?
Yes, I actually think there's something in that. But the people to do that, are not politicians. And actually, it's not really, Nigel, people like you and me. The people to do that are the Remain camp. The people to do that are the big businesses who fix Brussels for years with their lobbying, because they are the ones who have these business connections at the highest level. And more importantly, instead of the Remain camp doing its damnedest to hurt us, what they should be doing is actually saying, let us get the best possible deal on trade for Europe. Because this
Yes.
is going to hurt Europe too.
Yes.
And they're on this political journey, about a united Europe. And if I hear one more hypocrisy from either Remainers or indeed other people in the media saying, well, for some reason we can belong in a customs union and a single market and not subject ourselves to the no border control and submission to the European Court of Justice, just wake up and smell the coffee. I was left with this distinct impression from Monsieur Barnier that he is there, and what he's actually going to do is show us through the door. They see us as having left, and his job is to show us through the door. And we are trying to sell them a pound of pears, and they're trying to sell us a pound of apples. We're not even talking the same language, and I just wish, Remainers are not suddenly, children of the devil with forked tails. I mean, Remainers are good, decent people. They don't agree with you and me, but it's not the point. And I want them to think, what's in the best interests of the whole of Europe? And I think you're onto something.
Well, maybe we could get to that.
Let's go and talk to Scandinavia.
Yeah.
Let's go and talk to...
No, I mean, I'd love this to happen, but my feeling is that there is a lack of direction, there is an inconsistency coming from the Prime Minister and indeed from a cabinet that's very, very split. What, Digby Jones, do you think, in the face of 75% of the country not understanding what our Brexit position is, with Barnier trying to bully us in the most extraordinary way, what do you want to hear from Mrs May?
Well, the most difficult person ever to negotiate with in life is someone who's got nothing to lose. And at the moment, Theresa May has got very little to lose. Now, everybody else in the Conservative government have got a lot to lose. A general election. The DUP have got a lot to lose. Possibility of someone who they passionately hate, that's Corbyn, being Prime Minister. And at the end of the day, the nation needs steering. So if I was Theresa May, what would I be saying now? I'd say, this is my stance. You'll actually do this deal on these terms, that's financial services, that's services, and you do it with us outside the customs union, outside the single market, and therefore you can say we can control our borders and our judges. And if you don't, Monsieur Barnier, with great respect, let's save everybody a lot of time.
Yep.
And let's go and talk to the WTO. It'll do two things, Nigel. One is it will give business certainty. They could plan. Secondly, the world will go aghast for about 48 hours and say there ought to be 43 general elections by Friday. And then when people calm down, they'll realise they've then got what we need, which is we know where we're going. It's called leadership, by the way.
Yes.
And then what will happen is, for once, I think, Angela Merkel, Macron, and the rest will have countries like Scandinavia and the countries inside Scandinavia, and also Poland and others, coming to them and saying, hey, these boys are serious now. We've got to do something about it. Now, it might not mean that there's a deal. It might mean we do go WTO. But at least they know where we stand. Yeah,
and at least we know where we stand, because right at the moment, the country is not sure. Can I just say, Lord Digby Jones, thank you so much for coming on with us this morning, for giving us your view. And I thought what was very interesting there was that Digby said it's called leadership. Tell us where we're going. Give us some clarity. And by the way, for those of you listening who say, isn't that typical? Nigel's got a lever on the show. Well, in the last few weeks, I've had Alistair Campbell for a whole hour, Lord Adonis for half an hour. In fact, we've been somewhat underrepresented, guest-wise, with levers. In the face of Michel Barnier's bullying and the country being uncertain as to what her policy really is, what should the Prime Minister do? Let me know what you want to hear from Theresa May by calling me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think it's time for Mrs May to simply walk away, in which case you can text to 84850. Or maybe you think she should give in to Michel Barnier. Or perhaps in trade terms, we should call him Michel Barrier, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Now, the big difference, of course, between LBC and all the other mass of radio and TV programmes that you get every Sunday morning, it's there, it's all politicians and journalists. And in some cases, it seems to be almost all Remainers. Remarkable that the Andrew Marr Show, which is a good show in so many ways, should have a debate this morning between a Tory and a Labour MP. The Labour MP, Chuka Ramuna, one of the most prominent anti-Brexiteers in the House of Commons, against the Tory. So there must have been a contest, but, oh no, He was against Anna Soubry, who, of course, is threatening that she may have to leave the Conservative Party. And Miss Soubry said that she wants us to stay in the customs union because she worries otherwise we'll fundamentally undermine the peace process. And Ma asked her, wasn't she surely closer to Mr. Amuna than she is to Jacob Rees-Mogg? And she said, I'm not denying that. Well, I tell you what, no more politicians on politicians, no more journalists on journalists. This is for you, the great British public, to tell me what you want to hear from Mrs. May. And let's start with Ken, who's calling from Barnet. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm fine, but I rather like Digby Jones, who I thought was excellent, by the way, before the break.
I agree. He was fantastic.
I mean, the one thing we desperately need now is clarity and leadership, because we haven't got any.
Well, I come from two angles. I actually wanted desperately to leave. I didn't. I actually wanted a vote and hopefully to leave the EU.
Yep.
We got the referendum. I was doing it for my children because I think we'll be a better country in the future by leaving. However, my son had just started a new business and he was desperately worried if we left it could affect his business. So I actually voted Remain. However, I was extremely pleased when we decided to leave.
Oh, well, Ken, you couldn't lose, could you, really?
Well, yeah. I was a typical European. I was sitting on the fence. However...
Okay, so Ken, I mean, you come at this from an unusual angle, but given where we are now, Ken, what do you want to hear the Prime Minister say in these speeches that she's now set to deliver?
I would just like to hear a decision, and I would like the decision to be that we walk away now, we talk to the World Trade Organization, and we get on with our lives. And I think Lord Digby echoed how I feel. There was chaos for about 48 hours, as there was after the Brexit vote, and then everything calmed down.
OK. Ken, you want clarity and leadership. Either we do this or we're gone. I have to say, I'm very much coming to that point of view. I was very interested by a piece I saw in the Telegraph at the end of last week by Ambrose Evans-Pritchard on the business desk. He says, we've reached the cliff edge. It's time for Britain to walk away. And he says it reluctantly, but what else, he says, can we do? Hi, Nigel. Theresa May is getting nowhere with Brexit. It's about time Theresa May walked away. Walk away now. Enough is enough, says Mary. She is not going to take any notice of the Brexit elite bully boys any longer. Well, that I think, Madeline, actually would be the best message she could send to the country, because I really felt last week that with the punishment paper and then the speech of Barnier, frankly, they were beginning to look down their noses at us, beginning to treat us with contempt. And I want to see the British Prime Minister stand up and say, do not speak to the British people who voted in a referendum like this. We are a proud nation. We will not be dictated to by an unelected bureaucrat like you. People would cheer, and they really, really would. Jerome is a first-time caller from County Cork. Good morning, Jerome.
Good morning, Nigel. I'm a Remainer.
Yep.
And I have a question for you. I won't rant or anything. It's going to be a civilised question. The question I have is that for many years, on and off, I've travelled, say, between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now, if you, hypothetically, crash out of, say you just leave the European Union without any deal, you just leave lock, stock and barrel.
Yep.
How do you resolve the problem of controlling your borders? Now, all the leavers and arch Brexiteers seem to say it's up to the Republic to put up a barrier. Well, we're not leaving the European Union.
No, Jerome. No, Jerome, that's not true. That's not true. Look, nobody on the Leave campaign, least of all the DUP, is calling for the reintroduction of a hard border. Nobody. And I haven't, Jerome, and I was in Dublin for 2 days last weekend, and meeting lots of political figures and journalistic figures, and nobody in the Republic wants to return to a border. The only people, Jerome, who seem to want a border are people like Michel Barnier.
But how do you, hypothetically, how do you check people coming into Northern Ireland if you're going to control your border? How do you monitor people? I'm not talking about goods. I'm talking about people.
Well, Jerome, the answer to that, of course, is that Ireland is not part of the Schengen area. Thank goodness. So people, for example, if you get a car into Romania, you can drive it to Paris without it ever being checked through border after border after border. That is not the case with Ireland. It's not part of Schengen. And anybody coming from the south into the north and then looking to try and get to the mainland has either got to get a boat, a ferry, or get an aeroplane. You're right to say, if that route became something that was used for the illegal smuggling of people, that in some ways we'd have to act. But I do think the fact that the island of Ireland, is there, surrounded by the sea, makes that problem very, very much easier. But Jerome, just one quick thing for you. I mean, isn't it remarkable that the Irish government aren't standing up and shouting at Brussels and saying, can we please have a tariff-free deal with the United Kingdom, because otherwise Irish agriculture could suffer horribly?
But that's a possibility. But again, you seem to be slightly forgetting that the problem is that once, say, Britain is out of the EU, you're a different, say, legal entity. So in a sense, you've got the EU, say, as a legal entity, and then you've got say, Britain as a distinct legal entity.
Yes, you're right. You're right. We'll be an independent country. How about that?
Yeah, but if you're going to have different regulations, if you're going to have different, say, barriers to trade or barriers, if you're going to make life awkward, that's the problem, isn't it?
But Jerome, already, if we drive across that border, we've got a different tax regime, we've got a different currency. We live with that, and it's quite true. People drive north to the supermarket or south to the supermarket, depending on what sterling euro is doing. Yeah. So, we manage it now, we can manage it in the future. Just briefly, Jerome, what would you, and from a Remainer perspective, what would you want to hear Theresa May saying in these big set-piece speeches?
Well, I certainly would like that the traffic between, say, all sorts of traffic, people, goods, between, say, the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland, to continue as it is now. No barriers to trade. That's what I would like to see, because it's not only the peace process, but it's about trade and all those sorts of different elements, tourism.
Jerome, can I assure you, Jerome, that's what I'd like to see as well. And actually, if we do, as you put it, crash out of the European Union without a deal, maybe Ireland will have to consider its future, whether it might now not be better off leaving the EU too. I'm not saying it's on the agenda yet, but it will be a debate, I think, as time goes on. I certainly got that impression in Dublin last week. Thank you, Jerome. And again, civilised conversation with a Remainer. We try and be civilised here, if we possibly can be. Many of us are crying out for leadership and direction, as only 3% of people respond in a poll published in The Independent on Sunday, saying they really know what the Prime Minister wants out of this Brexit deal, and all of that in the face of Michel Barnier, who is getting tougher and tougher and tougher, to the point actually where he might start to alienate many of the member states of the European Union, because a lot of them would like tariff-free trade to continue, but he's saying, frankly, unless we stay in the customs union and in the single market, namely, if we effectively ignore the Brexit vote, we can't do that trade without barriers. Walk away now, May, says Phil. Article 50, says David, gave us 2 years to prepare to leave the EU. There is nothing in the rules that mentions a transition period. We should leave next year and make it very clear that we are. Let the EU do the running now. Well, David, you're quite right. I thought Article 50 was the transition period. It took us 9 months to trigger it. We had 2 years, or up to 2 years, to sort everything out. And now Mrs May seems to be desperate for a transition period. I think because she's coming under pressure from quite a lot of the big banks and the big multinational businesses. And the argument that it's all going to take time and there's a lot to sort out is the one that seems to be getting the upper hand. But Barnier, you see, having threatened us that we couldn't move on to even talk about trade unless we agreed to the exit bill, the more jurisdiction for the European Court, Barnier now is saying that we won't have a transition period. unless we accept, basically regulatory alignment, namely all the rules will be the same. But we do need stronger messaging. I mean, I'm very struck today in the Sun newspaper, page 4, David Wooding, PM, give us a say or we won't pay. So saying we won't give the 40 billion unless we continue to have veto rights over some of the laws that were agreed before we actually left. So are we trying to have more of a say, or are we trying to go for a clean break? They are very, very mixed messages. Andy says, out means out, not halfway in. Yes, Andy, it's exactly the point, really, that I'm trying to make. Jen says, I want to hear us say, we want nothing, we will pay nothing, balls in your court. Adam is calling from the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Nigel. The thing I'd like to hear Theresa May say, short of resigning and a proper Conservative like Jacobs Rees-Mogg coming to power, short of that, because that might not happen, I want her to grow a backbone and stand up and say, do you know what? We want to trade with you, we want to be friends with you, and if you want to keep putting these absurd obstacles in the way and keep disrespecting this country and, proving again and again and again how undemocratic you really are, then we will walk away and we'll see how quickly the European Union turns itself apart when you don't get our money and the German taxpayers have to fill that hole, the void that we have left. Also, when we put World Trade Organization trade barriers in place, we'll see just how quickly the German car industry plummets and then the German GDP starts to go down, making it even harder for them to make those payments. And then we'll see all the other countries fighting. And regarding what that bloke was saying earlier about the Irish border, it's very, very, very simple. Don't do anything. If they want to build a border and staff it and maintain it, let them, and we'll see just how quickly the Irish turn against them. Britain doesn't have to do anything with that border if it doesn't want to. Just let the European Union do it, and we'll see. They'll jump up and down about it because they are the ones who are destroying the Good Friday Agreement. We shouldn't be held to ransom to stay in a club that we no longer want to be in and we do not want to pay for just because of,
I think, Adam, economic concerns aside, I think the way Barnier behaved last week, not just with the leaked paper about potential sort of arbitrary justice that could be used over Britain, but with the speech he gave on Friday and his whole demeanour, didn't he prove the point, Adam, that unelected, arrogant, out-of-touch elites in Brussels behaving like bullies is exactly why we voted to leave, and I suspect if we had a second referendum on this, why we'd do so by an even bigger margin. I thought it was an absolutely disgraceful display, and I just want the British Prime Minister to stand. Can you imagine, as someone put it to me this morning, if you were the chief executive of a company and your company had been talked to like that, you would go to war publicly with whoever had said it. And it's about time the Prime Minister, she doesn't need to go to war, but stood up and started to defend our rights and our integrity and our pride as a nation. Adam, I thank you for the call. Frustrated Brexiteer there in Adam. Brian is calling from Welwyn Garden City. Good morning, Brian.
No, not Brian, actually. It's Russell.
Oh, is it? Right, OK. Well,
no problem.
Well, I tell you what, you're on the line, Russell, and are you from Welwyn Garden City?
I am indeed.
Well, there you go. Well, I tell you what, we got it half right, which is, I tell you what, I wish the Prime Minister was getting it half right. Russell, tell us what you think.
OK, this is a lesson for the hard Brexiteers.
Yep. But by the way, Brian, what is a hard Brexiteer?
Russell.
What is a hard Brexiteer?
Someone who wants to leave without any agreement whatsoever.
Okay. All right, go on.
Is it not?
Well, actually...
It's someone who wishes to go out and trade under WTO agreements.
I don't think anybody had that as their first choice, but I think Monsieur Barnier and Brussels are making it
Hang on a minute.
impossible.
I'm not interested. No, the hard Brexiteers are saying, go away, we don't want to know about you, let's just leave the EU and that's it, finish.
Okay.
That's the hard Brexiteer. True or false?
Let me say this, Russell. Nobody started with that position. everybody said it made common sense to continue with tariff-free business. But given, despite the trade imbalance, that Barnier and Co have made it impossible, that is the view that many are now coming to, yes.
Nigel, please answer my question. People are saying, let's get out, let's leave the EU, we don't need them, let's just go straight to WT. That is the hard Brexit argument. True or false? Answer yes or no.
The Brexit argument is we wish to leave the European Union and be an independent country, and anything else is secondary to that. But let's just, but for the sake of your argument, all right, there are many of us, and we just heard from Lord Digby Jones, and I quoted Ambrose Evans Pritchard in the Telegraph. There's a growing body of opinion, Russell, that we should stop wasting our time and just do it. So take that as a starting point and tell us what's wrong with that.
Could I say something, please?
Go on.
You're just talking over me. Everybody knows.
You keep asking me a question.
No, well, yes, and I asked for a yes and no answer, and you wouldn't give it. You went off on some tangent. Now, just let's get down to the basics. If we leave the EU without any agreement, we go to World Trade Organization international laws. True or false?
Well, I didn't know it was a quiz, but let's have a pop at true. Yeah,
it's true. That means that we then have to go under international law to hard borders, because tariffs will come into play and we will have hard borders. Also, you do not wish to have any emigration or immigration, whichever way you want to look at it, into our country from the EU. True or false?
False.
No, you don't. Excuse me, if you're under WTO rules, you will have no immigration from the EU.
No, Russell, I'm sorry. You are now heading off into Fantasyland. The point about...
No, I'm not.
The point about being...
That's the reality.
No. Russell, please listen to me. The point about being an independent, sovereign, self-governing nation-state is you can decide who you do and do not want to let into your country.
Yes, and you will have to have hard border. You will have to have a border which is policed, totally and utterly policed. You can't do it any other way than to have a border which is policed.
Well, I mean, I wish we policed the border better than we do at the moment.
Exactly. You see, you're actually confirming what I'm saying. You want a full hard border and stopping any goods coming in except on world tariff or World Organization tariffs.
Had it occurred to you that when you see those incredible container ships going up the channel, I think some of them now take 20,000 containers. Hardly any of them come from the European Union. They're coming from China and all over the world. And you know what? We manage to deal with it.
We are trading already with the world, Nigel.
Right.
We are trading with the world. We trade with 56 countries under EU trade agreements that were made by the EU.
Russell,
Excuse me, I know very well I can buy any product I like, more or less, from the US, and I can go buy it from China. I just have to go on the internet, and I can buy whatever I like, still today, and it comes via the post to me. No problems whatsoever. Now, once we go to World Trade Organization rules, we then have to apply tariffs.
Uh-huh.
And those tariffs will have to be policed, which means we will have to have a hard border. And going to Northern Ireland, what you're saying, we can just continue as we are.
Well, let's deal with tariffs, Russell, shall we?
Listen to me for a moment.
No, we're not going to Northern Ireland, Russell. You and I are talking about trade, and we haven't got time to do Northern Ireland as well. But let me just say this to you, that we don't actually have tariff-free trade with the EU, do we? Because we've been paying £10 billion a year for it.
You just don't listen to anyone else.
I do.
You're not listening to me. You're just repeating the same old things, and you're not listening to me. You're refusing. You just talk over me all the time.
All right, now, well, Russell, let's be fair. You've had a pretty good run.
I was talking about Ireland.
I know, and we haven't got time. We haven't got time, Russell. You've had a long go at this, and I take your point that World Trade Organization rules mean tariffs, and that is absolutely right. But we are living in the 21st century. We do trade with America and with China, and we deal with those tariff problems. I'm going to have to let Russell go. Don't like doing that, but sometimes you got no option. What he didn't say is, under World Trade Organization rules, we could also cut tariffs. More of that in a moment. Well, that last caller was lively. He called himself Russell, so we did a bit of checking. And actually, he has phoned LBC before, and he used to be called Brian. But he called himself Russell, I think for the purposes of today, to try and get through the switchboard. But he had a lot of opinions. And Tim in Marlow says, Russell had the beating of you. As usual, you avoided his questions. Well, I did my best, but there were so many of them. I mean, it was like University Challenge. I mean, it was quite difficult, and there wasn't much time to answer them. Nigel, I'm a Remainer, but that guy was ridiculous. Demanding yes or no answers is totally unreasonable, isn't it? Yes or no? Yes. And that's from James in Romania. Very good. Obviously in a very wealthy postcode somewhere in London, I would have thought. The idea that under World Trade Organization rules we won't have any immigration from the European Union, as being suggested to me, is clearly total and utter baloney. But we keep hearing, folks, about tariffs. Barnier, or Barrier, as we should call him, saying unless we stay in the customs union and the single market, namely if we don't leave, there are going to be tariffs. Oh dear, big red cross. World Trade Organization rules, tariffs, extra cost. What no one's telling you is this: that as members of the European Union, which is not a free trade club, because we pay £10 billion a year for the benefit of tariff-free access, and those total tariffs are less than the money we pay in. But the idea the European Union is about free trade is actually blown out of the water by something called the Common External Tariff. And they are tariffs that the European Union puts on goods that come into the European Union from all over the world. Only by being outside of the European Union can we get rid, totally, or reduce that common external tariff. Leaving the European Union, reducing the common external tariff means cheaper shoes, cheaper bras, and cheaper food. Actually, those who spend the highest proportion of their household income on food, on children's clothes, on all of those things, are the ones that would benefit the most from us leaving the European Union, getting rid of that common external tariff, and having cheaper consumer goods. And I think now that we've moved on to this phase, where it's beginning to look to be impossible to do a deal with Barnier unless something miraculous happens in the space of the next few weeks, we need to start having that debate. I'm going to go to Mark in Basildon. Mark, are you really called Mark?
I am actually, Nigel, and you are a political hero of mine.
Right.
I just want to move on now. Now, don't interrupt me, okay?
Oh, no, I promise I won't, Mark. Or Bill, or whoever you are, yeah.
I totally agree with Digby Jones. I'm a small, medium business managing director, 15 million turnover. It took me 40 years to do it. Like any company, like a country, it needs leadership. It needs someone at the helm. It needs somebody to stand up and say what we're going to do. And basically, without that, a rudderless ship goes nowhere. Now, the thing is, with all this threatening behaviour from the Europeans, I will not be ruled. I voted to stay in. I am now a staunch Brexiteer. I do not believe that the amoeba that run this, certainly the media, some of the media, a lot of the public, some of them of which ring up this station, have no faith in our business quality. The amount of quality that we've got in companies that run businesses, people like me even, that basically have no faith in our country. And that really boils me. And then when I get the Europeans threatening us, how dare they?
Is that what's turned you, Mark?
Well,
Is it their behaviour that's turned you from a Remainer to a Leaver?
I do. Cameron went over there and he tried to explain to them, look, you know, everybody was saying you're better off within and change within. They were never interested in the UK. They were never interested in our political system. They were never interested in fair play with the UK. We were just a cash cow. It's got to stop. And what worries me, Nigel, if this was 1938, 39, with the same political background now, we would have been amoebas ourselves. We never would have got involved in the Second World War to stop Germany from doing what they did.
Well, there are many, Mark, that would say that from 1933 through to 1939, we found it very difficult to stand up and confront reality, and those that did were pilloried. Excluded in many ways from polite society, considered to be warmongers and lunatics. So, thing is, Mark, if ever you take on a consensus, you find they throw a shed load of abuse at you.
I just want to say, just believe in our country, please, people. Yeah. Let's get on with it.
Right, and is that your message to Mrs. May, Mark? Is that your message to Mrs. May? Perfect. Mark, I thank you very much indeed for that. And I've got time to go to Jeffrey in Chelsea. Good morning, Jeffrey.
Good morning. I want to comment on this Irish question, which seems to keep arising.
Yes.
That people think is such an impossible hurdle. But I'm no expert on this, but Britain and the Republic of Ireland had an open border since the 1920s.
Yes, it's the common travel area.
Impossible to maintain.
Yeah, it's the common travel area. We need no lessons from Brussels in how to manage the Irish border, do we?
Indeed not. I think over time there were some hiccups, perhaps, in when tariffs might have been slapped on, for a year or two here and there, but they were always quickly worked out. So I don't think it's a problem. As far as I can see, no one on whether Remainer or Leaver wants a hard border there. The only people who seem to be talking about imposing a hard border or its necessity are the EU.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I've seen this again and again and again. And even if we do finish up, and we may well, with tariffs on goods that move north and south of the border, given technology, we can deal with it. Very interesting, Jeffrey. I mean, think about Canada. Canada and America, huge numbers of goods going back and forth across, sort of Detroit northwards over that bridge. And whilst there's a NAFTA agreement, there are lots of areas that are not covered by free trade, and they have a system in Canada where half an hour before you cross the border, somebody from the company inputs into a computer the goods that are coming in, and the tariff is automatically charged. It's not beyond the wit of man, Jeffrey, is it, for us to sort this out?
Not. And I mean, Sweden and Norway have a border which is far longer than the Irish border, and they seem to manage with none or virtually no checks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jeffrey, thank you for making that point. The common travel area, as Jeffrey says, has been around for a long time. I also strongly think that an exception should be made. If you believe in the political sensitivity of the Good Friday Agreement, then why don't the European Union, if they believe in that, say, whatever happens, we'll make sure there's tariff-free access for Ireland with their trade with the United Kingdom. And I'd love to see that, but hey, I'm not so sure that's going to happen. Bill says, think again, Nigel, and cancel Brexit. Well, I tell you what, this debate's gone well. In the next hour, we will talk about John McDonnell's call yesterday to bring back nationalisation on a massive scale, something he says won't cost the country any money. But I think we'll carry on with this debate. What is it you want to hear from Mrs. May? Is it we're going to walk away unless you start behaving sensibly? If it is, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps you think it's all been a terrible mistake, as Bill does, and we should stay part of the European Union. And I think after the top of the hour and after the news, I'll tell you what I want Mrs. May to say. So Mrs. May is going to give some big set peace speeches. And I'm asked on Facebook by Sharaluta, says, Nigel, what is your vision? Because every Remoaner seems to know what they want. Every Remoaner says, we respect the result of the referendum, but we'll do our best to undermine it. It seems to me to be the position of most of the Remoaners. Perhaps that's unfair. I don't know. If it is, I've no doubt you, the callers, will tell me. What do I want to hear from Mrs. May? I'd like Mrs. May in the speech to say, I've tried as Prime Minister to respect the referendum result, whilst doing so in a way that brings not just the country, but my cabinet together. We did, in phase one of these negotiations, make far more concessions than I'd intended to do at the start, particularly promising up to £40 billion of money as part of our exit fee. We've applied for a transition deal after Brexit, just to attempt to make the whole process smoother. And yet, every single time we give, all you do is throw sand back in our eyes. And frankly, what the European Union's chief negotiator did last week is a massive insult to the people of this country, and we simply cannot and will not put up with it. Brexit was primarily about getting the independence of the United Kingdom back from the European Union. Economic debates were a secondary concern, important though they are. But I did say in my Lancaster House speech last year that no deal was better than a bad deal. Perhaps in Brussels you've forgotten that. Well, actually, I mean it. And we're running up to this summit on the 22nd and 23rd of this month, where we're going to talk about trade. Unless you're prepared to show that you really do want to have a sensible, rounded trade deal, then we'll be forced to walk away at the end of March next year without any deal at all. We're going to immediately start talking to the World Trade Organization about putting things in place. We've decided that actually a transition is not what the British public voted for. We will be leaving on March the 29th next year. Let's all be grown up and try and do it as sensibly as we can. That is what I would like to hear the Prime Minister say in these speeches, that there is still one last chance. We have the big summit at the end of the month, but we start to get to a point as the months run out where actually, even moving to World Trade Organization rules, there wouldn't be time to sort out the nuts and the bolts. So I do think we're approaching pretty much crisis point on this in many, many ways. Colm is calling from Omagh in Northern Ireland. Good morning.
Hello, Nigel.
Good morning. So what would you like to hear the Prime Minister say?
Well, if you would just leave her alone, she's trying to get the best deal, I think, for you.
Well,
the reason she's having to, give up on stuff because you need it. You need it, Nigel. You're going to be... And can I just say, you're disillusioned about Northern Ireland and Ireland. You keep going on about, we're going to join the UK.
I'm not disillusioned. Colm, I'm not disillusioned. I had a fantastic time in Dublin last week.
There's a couple of people there who don't know what's wrong with their heads. But you're saying, Nigel, you haven't told the people, like, a United Ireland is coming. It's going to be the Brexit because of Brexit. Either way, if we get a bad deal... if the majority of Northern Ireland voted to stay in the EU. But if the DUP push for it...
Well, do you know what? Do you know what? You say that, right? But I heard this argument about Scotland. Yeah, but hang on, Nigel. Scotland voted to stay in the European Union. Therefore, the Brexit vote will mean that Scotland will separate from the United Kingdom. In fact, that now looks less likely than it has for many, many years, because up against the wall, the Scots voter will say we'd rather be with the United Kingdom than part of that European Union. And so I feel that the union between Scotland and England is actually much stronger since the Brexit vote. And whilst there are huge debates and concerns both sides of the border, I wouldn't be so certain, Colm.
The inevitability is a United Ireland. I mean, if it's going to be catastrophic for us in the north, why would we? Turkey's voting for Christmas. Why would we go along with it?
And the converse may be true, Colm. If it works out really well for the UK, maybe Ireland will say, do you know what? We're now a net contributor. We've lost a huge fishing resource. Most of our trade isn't denominated in euros anyway. It's all been a mistake. I don't know. We will have to see. Nigel, watched Anna Soubry on Mar today, supporting Remain again. Has she forgotten that her constituents voted leave? Or didn't their vote mean anything to her, says Phil, in North Wales? Yeah, I mean, my comment was that it was a bit odd for the BBC to have Labour and Tory and both Remainers on, but hey, question time on Thursday night was 4 Remainers and 1 Leaver, so I don't know. I think the caller Russell fails to understand that WTO will be better for us, says John from Wales. At the moment, John, WTO is being put up as a great bogeyman. It's a cliff edge. We're going to fall off into the abyss. Life will be impossible, as I've tried to point out. Actually, by getting rid of the common external tariff and making people's weekly shopping baskets better, there might just be, once that argument gets out there, a bit more support for WTO rules. Kim says, why the hell are you not part of the negotiations, Nigel? Come on! As if to say, I've been shirking Kim, I've said from day one, I would do anything I could to help this government, whether it was with Brexit, whether it was with relations with the administration in the White House, and boy, relationships there are not very pretty. But Kim, this government, they don't want me to do anything. I'm afraid I'm just not up to it for the snobby old Tories, so there we are. Dot says, with half her cabinet on the side of the EU, what chance does May stand? I think it's more than half, Dot, if you really look at the numbers. Sally is calling from Kingston. Good morning, Sally.
Good morning, Nigel. Lovely to talk to you. First thing I'd like to say is I don't think there's anybody better than you that could be on the negotiating team, but there we are. There we have what we have.
Yeah.
But the second point is, why aren't we hearing all that's happening in Europe just now? There's massive crises. There's still the Greek crisis with no money. There's Italy coming up with the same situation, massive emigration, problems with the people who have emigrated into the country, illegal immigration I'm talking.
Yep.
And we all the time talking about how Britain's going to be this and that and how terrible everything is for poor British people. Look what's happening in Europe. Why aren't any of the newspaper or anybody talking about the real situation in Europe just now?
I suppose, Sally, to be fair, there is growth back in the Eurozone.
So they say.
Well, I think there is a bit of growth back in the Eurozone. And certainly one or two countries like Portugal, have turned themselves around a little bit. But there are political crises in Europe, Sally.
Germany, for a start.
Well, I saw Martin Schulz, my old friend from the European Parliament, who said he wouldn't join the coalition, and then decided he would join the coalition, and guess what? He'd be foreign minister, and now he's not going to be the foreign minister, or indeed leader of the SPD party for very much longer. So Germany is basically without a government still months after the election. And the other big battle that no one's noticing, Sally, is what's going on in Hungary, where a very, very strong Prime Minister is saying no to the European Union. We will not accept migrant quotas from you. We will not pay for Mrs. Merkel's mistakes. And where there is a very public war of words between him and George Soros going on a very high level. And, of course, Sally, I almost forgot, we've got the elections in Italy taking place on March the 4th, where it looks like the Five Star Movement, the brand new or relatively brand new political party, are probably going to top the poll. Yeah. And possibly 81-year-old, though he doesn't look 81, could be to do with the facelifts, I'm not sure, but 81-year-old Berlusconi could become the Prime Minister again.
The thing that really interests me is the fact that Eastern Europe, who have had mass emigration into Britain and into other countries as well, France has had similar, but they don't want any immigration into their countries. They must be empty.
Well,
all these empty houses,
depends where you go, Sally. It depends where you go. I went to Lithuania 2 or 3 years ago, talking to the Prime Minister, and he said, over 20% of our people have left the country. And I did see in the rural bits of Lithuania, boarded up houses, places empty, because the trouble with Lithuania isn't just that they've lost a fifth of the population. They've lost most of their young doctors, most of their young lawyers. They've lost they've lost so much of their young talent. So that is a massive problem. But the Hungarian argument isn't so much about numbers, it's about culture. And the argument goes that if you take large numbers of people from countries, Middle Eastern countries particularly, where attitudes towards women, attitudes towards society as a whole are completely different. And if you think you can take large numbers of people from those backgrounds and integrate them within your communities easily and peaceably, well, Viktor Orban looks at what's happened in Germany, particularly looks at what's happened in some towns in Sweden, and just says, no, we're not going to do this. So Sally, I would say that we had the Eurozone crisis. You're quite right that Greece is a disaster zone and many other parts of the Mediterranean have suffered. But I do think the EU has a big political crisis on its hands, and I thank you for the call. Sam is calling from Worthing. Good morning, Sam.
Oh, hi, Nigel. Nigel, I'd say to Brexit, but I think we need to be a bit more realistic about this argument. I don't want to get on the emotional side of it. I was just reading about WTO on their website. All member states have to have a hard border. Goods coming in will have to be policed. I think it's quite clear. We either come out cleanly, or we stay in. There's no in between, or no.
Well, they are the two choices, Sam, as you put it. There is the possibility, of course, or there should logically be the possibility of a trade deal. But ultimately, Sam, what we voted, the vote was political, right? Brexit was a political vote to leave political union. And if that means WTO, then it means WTO.
Well, if it means WTO, then how do we deal with the, Ireland issue? I mean,
but Sam, there is a difference
you
here.
Can't have an exception. I mean,
yes, yes, you can. Come on, Sam. We've had on and off a common travel area with Ireland for about 95 years. We've made an exception for Ireland in a whole host of ways because of our shared and yet very complicated history.
Yeah, I understand that, but it seems to be to have a WTO exception or a rule change. All member states will have to unanimously agree.
No, Sam.
Got EU member states in that as well.
Sam,
so I think we need to be a bit more honest.
No. Let's be honest. The WTO has within it exceptions that can be made in cases of political sensitivity, and I think, Sam, we can make that case in Switzerland of political sensitivity, making the point that the Good Friday Agreement has made life there a damn sight better than it was before. We've got to do all that we can to preserve it. And I think, Sam, with WTO, I can't promise you, but I believe they'd be on our side. After all, their primary role is to make trade easier across the world. But I thank you for the point. Well, whilst we ponder what Mrs May should say in these set-piece speeches that are lined up in response to mass confusion in this country as to what the government's real position is, and increasing threats from Monsieur Barnier, it is a very fair question to ask, where does Labour stand on all of this? Because I thought during the manifesto launches before the last election they were perfectly clear. We're leaving the single market, we're taking back control of our borders. Much of that has changed. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has been on ITV's Peston on Sunday this morning, and he said a second Brexit referendum would divide the country again, adding those divisions are really still there. OK. Then he says the better route is to have a general election. We'd never turn our back on democratic engagement, he said, but added that he would worry about opening up the potential of right-wing xenophobia. OK. McDonnell said, well, I think it better we have a general election. Better we have a general election on the issue and all the other issues, because you can then have a wider debate as well. I think what he means is, yeah, I know that millions of you voted for us, saying we'd leave everything, but actually we've completely changed our minds now. Our intention now is to keep Britain part of a customs union and some form of the single market. But rather than coming back to you for a second referendum, we would like a general election and perhaps a coalition with the SNP to put that in place. However angry and upset some leavers are with the sheer indecision, frankly, of Mrs May. I'm conscious there are more than 4 million people, considering more than 4 million people, that voted Labour at the last election, who had voted Brexit the year before, and I suspect they, in many ways, are going to finish up being the angriest of all. That's what I think, because I can see the direction that the Blairite Parliamentary Party is taking Mr Corbyn in. And, it's pretty clear he seems to be up for being the next Prime Minister, doesn't he? Not sure that he will, but hey. Stanley is calling from Belfast. Good morning, Stanley.
Hello there, Nigel. I'm my old hero there. Nigel, I don't understand how the border, as it's constituted at the minute, can be a template for any future border, because currently the border is a criminal corridor. It's a border for smugglers, petrol for cigarette smugglers,
yes,
cattle rustlers,
yes,
and in fact, it costs our economy here 100 million a year in lost taxes on diesel smuggling, and according to the Irish Times, it costs the Irish economy 900,000 euros, 900 million euros. Can you believe in smuggling? But after Christmas, we had the case where an Egyptian guy came over from England, came down through Northern Ireland, went to Dundalk, murdered a Japanese student, stabbed two of his friends, and the Irish authorities have no idea when that man came through the border. And in fact, you'll not believe it, but the local TDs were saying the border, as it is constituted at the minute, is a threat to our national security. So, actually, the border in Northern Ireland is a red herring.
Okay, Stanley, I mean, your point is a valid one because, as I said earlier, you've got a different tax regime, north and south. You've got a different currency, north and south, which fluctuates. So whether it's illegal smuggling or whether it's consumer choice, there is a lot of, changeable cross-border, movements of money. I understand that. Stanley, what everyone's scared of is they see the lack of border checks as being part of the benefit of the Good Friday Agreement and don't want to turn their backs on that.
Well, Nigel, nobody in Northern Ireland, when they voted on the Good Friday Agreement, had a slightest consideration for the European Union. And nobody in their right mind, nobody ever dreamt that they had to accept every machination and change in the European Union. They didn't vote for a single for a united Europe.
No. Well, Stanley, you're quite right. You see, Stanley, I go to Brussels, right? I go to Brussels, where in the European Parliament, speakers get up and say, we only had the peace agreement in Northern Ireland because of our work here in the European Union. They've done their absolute best for 20 years to claim credit for something that, in my opinion, was brokered by the Americans, a process actually that began with John Major and went on through Tony Blair. So, Stanley, they're trying to rewrite history in a way, aren't they?
Absolutely. The peace process here has become, it's like feeding a crocodile. And unfortunately, the subsidies that the British government and the European Union have used European subsidies to put money to terrorist organisations to stop them, to keep them quiet, to stop them from bombing and stop them from shooting people. But it hasn't worked, and people are actually, even people in Northern Ireland now are actually asking for the Good Friday Agreement to be reformed because it's an agreement that suits 20 years ago, and the whole world has changed, and Northern Ireland has changed, and we need a reform not only of the European Union, but the Good Friday Agreement. And nobody in Northern Ireland would call it a Good Friday Agreement because when policemen were shot as bargaining chips, you can't refer that to the Good Friday Agreement.
Right, OK, listen, Stanley, you made some very valuable points there. And Stanley, I was talking earlier about the fact with different currencies and taxes, there is a lot of this cross-border trade, and Stanley was saying actually it's being used outright in the black market for smuggling, and he hasn't got a problem at all with a border there that is policed in some way. If Ireland does not like the idea of a hard border, then leave the European Union. They would not look back, says Richard in East Sussex. William says on Twitter, having given it some thought, I've concluded that Brexit is a destructive decision that we will not take. Well, I tell you what, if the Prime Minister wants to get up in one of these speeches and say, actually, it's been a terrible mistake, we're not really going to leave at all, goodness knows what the political backlash in this country would be. Do not underestimate, at some point in time, the potential anger and power of those who, despite being told by the international establishment they shouldn't do it, voted for Brexit. There are millions of people out there getting frustrated, millions more watching and waiting. Lenny is calling from Ashford in Kent. Good morning, Lenny.
Good morning, sir. What it is, I've been a Conservative all my life.
Yep.
And when Theresa May made her maiden speech, I went, great. That is exactly everything I wanted to hear. But I've got documentary evidence that it didn't mean a thing. Not a thing, Nigel.
When you say documentary evidence, Lenny?
Well, what it is, I mean, I've been on this program on LBC many times.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to create jobs and build houses on brownfield sites for many years.
Yeah.
And Conservative policy doesn't mean a thing. What they say doesn't mean a thing.
All right.
And if anybody ever wants it, I'll gladly come to anyone's office and show them. You'll have the shock of your life.
All right, so they haven't delivered for you on brownfield development. What would you... But in terms of Brexit, and I do agree the whole business agenda is part of that, what would you like to hear us say, Lenny? I mean, you were pleased with her, from the sounds of it, her Lancaster House speech a year ago.
I don't think she can say anything because the Europeans don't respect her because she's been so weak. You've got to put someone up against Europe who they respect and they know you mean it.
And she's not the right person, no?
No. I'll be quite honest. I mean, this chap is he stands there. We've got no one to say to him, "Oi, sunshine, the party's over," and I mean what we say, and that is it.
Well, I think, Lenny, I rather agree with that. Thank you. I've got time to go to Peter in Sunningdale. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Nigel. I'm a great fan. It's the first time I've ever spoken to anyone on the radio, so if you could bear with me a second.
Welcome. You're on LBC, Peter, but just think we're having a conversation. Now, what should... just in a couple of sentences, what should she say?
Well, I think she's obviously got to tell them that we are a great country, and we've always been a great country, and I'm absolutely disgusted. My wife is French, and we have spent a lot of time in the south of France, and we know many, many people across the Europe. Most of them would like to get out of Europe. So this idea that there's some sort of utopia within Europe is absolute rubbish. And the other thing I would like to say is that many of them have said that they don't like the tyranny of the Germans. And there's a lot of people that feel that most of the countries in Europe have been dominated by the Germans, and some of them even say there's a jackboot on their throat. So I think that we've got to stand up and say, look, we are British, we can deal with the rest of the world. And one other thing I would say is that really annoyed me some time ago when David Cameron said to you about racism.
Oh, yeah.
When I was at school, racism was African, Asian, Australasian and European. And as far as I'm concerned, it is the Remainers that are actually racist.
Well,
they are the people that do not want to deal with other people around the world. They want to deal with the supremacists within Europe.
Well, I don't know whether they're racist or not, Peter, but what I do know is they want to build a big European state, and we voted against it. I thank you for coming on the radio. See, it wasn't too bad, was it? And any of you out there they've never done it before, it's 0345 6060 973, and it's like having a chat over a cup of tea or something else, whatever. I think we've done as much as we can on that. We need clarity of direction and leadership from our Prime Minister. She needs to deliver it very, very quickly.